The changes are very subtle between each patch and region. Subtle enough to make a difference? Hello and welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam and this is World Watch. If you're new to this channel, I watch every single playoff game, or however you want to put it, for each playoff of all the 9 participating regions, yes, including that one. On today's bracket, we're going to be exploring the playoff series between August 6th through August 11th. So that's 6 days worth of playoff games, as well as discussing a couple of notable stuff, but primarily about the patch notes. So far, the regions that have been playing, we had LPL is finished with their playoffs, and all four teams have been qualified. We got ourselves LCK, LCS, PCS, CBLOL, LLA, and LJL. So we're adding 2 regions onto it. The PCS and the CBLOL both got one playoff series in. If you want to see everything that are going to be coming up with the reviews of these particular playoffs, I have down below a link to the TikTok in which I put them as I watch them right off the bat, if you do not want to miss a single thing as they come along, or if you're okay with waiting on a weekly basis. But without further ado, we're going to take a look at some of the still kind of bizarre mispositioning, lack of proactivity, and non-confident teams that have gone through. So let's take a look at this set of playoffs for this week. And we're back with the Chinese LPL regional qualifier. So playoffs round 2. We got ourselves Edward Gaming versus Gen.G Esports, and congratulations to Gen.G Esports on being the 4th team to qualify for Worlds. Honestly, they should have been the 2nd, but eventually is better than never, right? Now, they are by far the strongest macro neutral vision play team that the LPL is sending. Their coordination is fantastic, but that's kind of a staple of the region. I find that they are now becoming a little bit overzealous, but the gradual improvements, series after series, that they've had over the playoffs and now regionals, meant that most should have expected this result for this playoff. Edward Gaming, for their part, are still showing some signs of hope. They still have spectacular coordination, matching that with supervision play, and you have a team that understands how to work around team fights and neutral objectives. But their adaptation from game to game, not to mention some of their drafts, tend to make things a little bit harder for them than they need to. I expect them to secure the 4th seed unless somehow Weibo Gaming and Top Esports have miraculous improvements of some sort. My MVP of the series is Gala, who played out of his mind this series. He was really freaking good. And we're back with the Japanese LJL upper bracket semifinals. We got ourselves Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming versus Detonation FocusMe. God, I hated this series. By all accounts, during the series, the Hawks had a better vision play, neutral setup, draft adaptation, macro choices. So why didn't they win? Well, it was kind of close. They weren't that much better, and we could really chalk it up to Detonations having more or better coordination, more confidence, more proactivity, slightly better in the vision denial department. But in all honesty, it's because the Hawks didn't find any time to engage against Dead FM. All fights are started by Dead FM, and sure, the odd punish from an out-of-position player is kind of good, but full neutral setups, random dives or sieges, the kind of positionings in mid lane, any team fight, Dead FM pulls the trigger first. And when you have any advantages and you never push it or use it to end games, to end anything, the opponents are going to look for any advantages available. Dead FM, for the love of God, also please get better neutral play or macros in general, or just better draft adaptations. I hate this winning off of just machismo alone. It's not going to fly internationally. My MVP for this series is Milan, who was just the most consistent player, maximizing damage where needed. Yeah, that's about it. And we're back with North America's LCS upper bracket round 2. We got ourselves Golden Guardians versus NRG. And congrats to NRG on being the 5th team to qualify for Worlds. Now, the Guardians had something in them that showed a much stronger understanding of their win conditions, how to adapt. Their early game prowess was really there. But holy shit, the macro choices were some of the worst I've seen so far. And that's saying something. The coordination also suffered from it incredibly. NRG, on their end, played stock standard the entire way, leaning into their coordination and aggression, and it paid off. Granted, neither team inspire much confidence for how they'll represent Worlds if, the Guardians also go, but I'll always take the proactive team that avoids losing trades over the team that has decent early game and regularly throws it away. Something needs to change from Golden Guardians if they want any confidence from anyone that they are even close to being Worlds caliber, because right now, they look like they should have started in the lower bracket. My MVP of the series is FBI, who continues to maximize damage and be the most consistent player amongst his squad. And we're back for China's LPL's regional qualifier, the elimination round for the lower bracket part of it. We got ourselves Top Esports versus Weibo Gaming. Quite honestly, looking over the series, the only thing that I could really think of is, could either team beat Edward Gaming for the 4th world slot? And my kind of wavy answer is no. Both teams played some solid vision, incredible coordination, and great understanding of their win conditions and adapting from game to game. But the looming concern were always based on the monumental mistakes, either micro or macro. If my expectations for each game is looking out for how either team was going to throw away a lead, heck, I was just kind of baffled at how few mistakes that were being made from Weibo in Game 5. But the regularly rushed neutrals, bizarre flanks, the shy especially being a sore thumb for Weibo, make it very hard for me to be convinced that Weibo Gaming has a strong chance. If their performance is like what it was in Game 5, maybe, but otherwise it's kind of hard to be convinced of the situation. My MVP of the series is Weiwei, who managed to create such strong map pressure during the entire series. It's very solid. And we're back with China's LPL's final best of 5 before Worlds. In the regional round 2 final qualification, we got ourselves Edward Gaming versus Weibo Gaming, and wow, congratulations to Weibo Gaming on being the 6th team to qualify for Worlds. I was grossly mistaken about how Weibo would do against Edward Gaming. Kind of. The play from Weibo has shown us some of the absolute best macro plays so far, and equally some of the worst macro plays so far. Bar for bar, I don't think that Weibo is stronger as a team than Edward Gaming, but the inconsistent nature of Edward's play, from either the solid early games and then throwing those away more and more, or the inability to close out leads properly, or to use the vision in ways that prioritizes neutral objectives, just means that Weibo, who had the ability to close out games and avoid those kinds of mistakes more often, is just great in comparison. I mean, in the international stage, Weibo is likely to be one of those teams that people underestimate a little bit because of the bizarre macro choices. But given this, even the smallest amount of lead, they will pounce and it'll be over. My MVP for the series is Light, who continued to be the consistent and outperforming player. Just really good. And we're back with Korea's LCK's first playoff in the round 1. We've got ourselves DRX versus Hanwha Life Esports. By all honesty, how does DRX keep finding themselves in summer playoff situations? Now, Hanwha Life holds standard approaches to this game that I don't think show exactly how they play at their best or their worst. They're vision play was solid, map movements made sense, it gets a little bit wild and chaotic with their skirmishes, and it felt almost like a slog to get through this 3-0. Now, Humble Life have a stronger approach or they better at least have a stronger approach for whoever they're facing in round 2, while DRX have a chance in the regionals, but this series really showed me that this is just a team with no coordination at all, and barely a sense of how their win conditions work. And a chance would really be stretching it, at least. Now, they've surprised me last year. I still don't expect anything from them at all. So, my MVP for this series is Viper, who looked like he kind of showed up and did a lot of damage. This series really wasn't insightful in the least. And we're back with Latin America's LLA. In the upper brackets semifinal, we got Estral versus Movistart R7 or Rainbow 7. Well. If anything, R7 are excellent with their vision play and neutral setup. Outside of that, both teams show some serious inconsistency regarding applying win conditions, adaptation between games, side lane pressure, especially coordination. The more and more I look at them play, the less confident I get at their prospects for Worlds, or at least playing in it. Comparing them also to Isurus, who's been much stronger and showing so far, R7 are the only team to show some semblance of preparation for these series. Otherwise, it's looking more like a disjointed solo queue game. Estral, you have a chance to redeem in the lower bracket, but you tend to play around strong early game plays with no actual transition to the mid to late game. It just kind of means nothing. My MVP of the series is Miru, who created pressure in some spectacular ways. And we're back with Korea's LCK round 1 still. We got ourselves Dplus Kia versus T1. Quite honestly, it's good to see Faker is still in the form we expect him to be in. Yeah. Now, Dplus continues their curse of strong early game, weak mid to late game. Now, for vision, draft adaptations, neutral setups, and map control, Dplus was king for the early game. But they would never push those leads and slowly secede control to T1, who are absolutely unfazed the entire time. Now, T1, for all their weird choices and machinations, always find ways to maximize gold, even things out a little bit, and even balloon the leads they find eventually. Both teams are a little bit wild in terms of their engage angles and attempted picks, but when push comes to shove, T1 keeps getting away with the terrible drafts by having stronger coordination. And it's all just bizarre. Now, that is to say, T1 do play some solid vision and pretty good neutral setups very well, but they make their lives so much harder with these drafts. I can't believe they keep getting away with it. My MVP of the series is Keria, who keeps finding engage angles that really wreck the day for Dplus. And we're back with the Latin America's LLA in the lower bracket. Still, we got ourselves round 3. Isurus versus 6 Karma. God, I really thought Isurus could do it. But, in all honesty, the series was going to go either way. And regardless of the situation of who won, it was going to be fine for me. Where Isurus had overall better vision play, application of map pressure, and understanding of their win conditions. 6 Karma had better macro choices, some decent neutral setups, and a slightly better coordination when under pressure. And that's the notable key thing here. I couldn't help but feel that Isurus was overconfident while 6 Karma was kind of hesitant. But as the series moved on, the hesitation started to grow in Isurus. And it was over by that point where 6 Karma was already cool and collected. Now, I do worry about the very slow nature that 6 Karma play. I would find myself wondering why would they have a 2K lead for 6 to 20 minutes, like from minute 6 to 20, building up nothing, while Isurus would have 4 turrets on a deficit to the 1 that they would take? Maybe? I guess that is why I don't have much of a confidence in 6 Karma to begin with. My MVP of the series is On Fleek, who continuously applied pressure across the map in very subtle ways. And we're back with Korea's LCK upper bracket with round 2, but in the upper bracket. KT Rolsters versus T1, the Telecom Wars. And this was by far the best series. Both teams are excellent with vision play, neutral, macro options, ballooning leads that have been established early, incredible coordination, the whole 9 yards. I am confident in saying that both of these teams are world's caliber. Now, when comparing the two teams, here are the best indicators of what it looked like when one wasn't completely snowballing the game out of control is Game 5, really. While the first 4 games are great at showing how to balloon leads out of an opponent's control, Game 5 is how to maneuver them in subtle ways. And T1 was by far the better side lane macro team around. What bothers me slightly a little bit, though, from this is that T1 have a bizarre habit of creating difficult-to-execute drafts to their detriment. And here we have Game 5 with the most cohesive one to date that they have made, with the most bafflingly one-sided macro game I have seen so far from them. T1, please continue this route. My MVP of the series is Zeus, who managed to create unbelievable amounts of pressure on his own. And we're back with the North American LCS second round lower bracket. We got ourselves Evil Geniuses versus Team Liquid. What happens when you can't find any moments for early leads and your opponent just does the bare minimum not to throw the game? Well, this is what happens. Now, how effective do you have to be to claw back from defeat? Honestly, Evil Geniuses showed that what happens to solid teams that choke, because what we saw was not conducive of a third-seeded team. Meanwhile, Team Liquid continues with their excellent early game, from vision to neutral objectives and coordination. Now, there is still some concerns regarding how they balloon leads, but the consistent macro play really helped when faced against a very much struggling Evil Geniuses. Do I think that they'll have what it takes to get to Worlds? Maybe. Are they Worlds caliber? Not quite. But the bridge to get there is not huge. Just needs a little bit of tweaking to figure out how to get their ballooning in order. My MVP of the series is Summit, who really created so much chaos for the Geniuses. And we're back with Korea's LCK round 2 upper bracket. Still, Hanwha Life versus Gen.G. What an incredibly tragic series out of Hanwha Life. Now, for starters, Gen.G are for sure world's caliber, but their approach needs to be challenged, as Hanwha Life couldn't cut it today. Both teams have some strong understanding of their win conditions and how to approach neutrals, and some interesting coordination. Now, Hanwha Life had the stronger early game, especially in regards to macro pressure and vision play, but never found an avenue to actually close out or balloon their leads consistently. Game 2 especially being super tragic, the last fight within there was a nail in a coffin for them, as while having a huge lead, one fatal flaw in Gen.G being the stronger team at closing out games did it. Now, how will Gen.G fare against T1 is a little harder to tell here, but it should be interesting, as Gen.G is a more kill by 1,000 cuts approach versus T1's eccentric pace. My MVP of the series is Peanut, who dictated the pace of the game in some baffling ways. And we're back with the first playoff of the Southeast Asian PCS in the upper bracket round 1. We've got ourselves the Australian or Oceanic LCOs Team Bliss for the second seed against Beyond Gaming from the PCS's third seed. Practically a show match. Now, Team Bliss has another chance, but let's be real here, they really don't. Series like this are kind of hard to evaluate when the skill gap is just so large. Beyond Gaming kept get some solid vision, some good pressure, some good side lane setup, decent adaptation to draft, so on and so forth. But that's to be expected when you're 11 to 20k up in gold in each game. Team Bliss, for their part, did try some interesting stuff, but always drafted compositions that were very difficult to pull off, with very few avenues to come back in. Now, after this series, I hope to see them actually try simpler drafts for the lower bracket, but I have no hopes that they'll get that series. Maybe one game. Beyond Gaming will have to show us what they are really about when they go up against J-Team. My MVP of the series is Kongue, who really made Why Not look foolish. And we're back with Brazil's CBLOL's round 1. We're starting in the lower bracket. We got ourselves Fluxo versus Vivo Cade Stars. They're pretty new this year. And God, the CBLOL is so hype sometimes. Honestly, if I was to look at either of the teams and ask, are they world's caliber? The answer would be an obvious no. Neither were great at closing out games, very inconsistent to sloppy around neutral objectives, very poor vision play, coordination kind of all over the place. However, something that surprised me was how well they understood their own win conditions, their opponents, and the adaptation from game to game, as well as how to apply it. Much of everything else can be tuned and fixed, which on some games either team was solid on some of the weaker points that I had mentioned. But if you are a team that isn't consistent on your win conditions and adaptation, then it won't matter if you got most of everything else down pat. An equal team with those same skills and an understanding of their draft will get the win every time. My MVP of the series is Weibo, who consistently made Tai feel irrelevant in this series. And we're back with North America's LCS's second round lower bracket. We got ourselves Dignitas versus Golden Guardians. And this is where Golden Guardians that I was expecting went. Who knew? Now, Dignitas, as your vision play and early game approach to win conditions were, as nice as they were, the transition to the mid game was just not there. Some weaker coordination, bizarre neutral options, inconsistent vision, is generally not great. While Golden Guardians, for their part, I can see where they would be world's caliber, but quite frankly, their lackluster early game and vision approach is just bizarre. Couple that with the consistent mispositioning is just baffling. Like, every player had some weird misposition issues. Now, Golden Guardians do understand very well how to balloon leads, properly approach their side lanes, and understand neutrals nicely, as well as where their win conditions are, but getting caught so often and the weaker early game approach, to me, just means that the international teams are just going to eat that up. It's not enough. My MVP of the series is River, whose engage approaches and zoning really aided the transition from early to mid game. I gotta say, some of the best series that we've had so far have come from this particular week of play. There are still some disappointments, notably, and I'm going to start this first. The biggest part of the disappointments are the supposed format changes again with the PCS. I've talked about this when we were doing Road to MSI for the spring playoffs / winter, so on and so forth. That came up beforehand, where the LCO teams that have been added take away from potentially, I would say arguably better PCS teams from being able to attempt to qualify for Worlds, and it makes the actual technical playoff much shorter for the PCS. Now, it is a nice tidbit in view as to how the LCO would have participated at Worlds, but it's also unfair to these teams where their qualification options are rendered mute and humiliating. I don't know. To me, I think that the prospect of looking at the PCS, seeing how these LCO teams participate and barely even come close to winning any games, or if they do win a game, because we'll see. I watched one best of 5, but it seems to be mirroring very much the way that it did during the first half of the year, and it's not okay. That, and combined with the fact that many of the other formats from around the world having changed for arguably the better. I find that the LJL format is much stronger, even though every team is qualified and some of the best of fives are not as good. Given the kind of nature that they go for, instead of making these particular best of fives so short as a playoff where we know who's going to win, we get a better sense and progression for teams to get better over time and be more competitive with one another. Same thing with the LCK. The LCK's format, I believe, is much stronger for it, mirroring a little bit closer to the way that the LPL does it, and we no longer have teams that are randomly qualifying in ways that just doesn't vibe, so to speak. So, outside of the PCS and the LEC having formats that I think hurt them in the long term, the other regions have improved their formats greatly for at least the summer season. And I would like to hear from you. What do you think? Do you think that the formats so far from the PCS are fine? It's a great chance for the LCO to still participate? Or do you think that instead of having this weird EUNA thing that's going to happen later in, that they should have just had the LCO have their own playoffs and still participating? Heck, why not even give a third slot to them? But that's a subject for much later down in the line when they actually have that best of five. We'll see. Next off, actually, we have the subject of patch notes, as a matter of fact. Having noticed so far, as the CBLOL played their first best of five in the lower bracket, that they were playing on patch 13.5. And given that the VCS starts, again, I'm recording this on the 13th of August, but only having covered from up until the 11th August, VCS having started this week, and the LEC's next week, and we have the EU versus NA much after, later, probably after September when the LEC is over. We're looking at 13.13 to possibly 13.17. That range of patch notes is huge. Usually, right, rarely even, we would get three patches for playoff qualifications. Rare. I think it happened 1 year. Even rarer, even still, with just 1 year, we had one patch. And I think in 2019, that was the ideal way to go. 2019 or 2020, one of the two, the year that Lilia came out, one patch for every region was the best way to evaluate qualification. It's harder to manage because not every region starts at the same time, but I think that was the smartest approach to qualification. Otherwise, it's most of the time, it's two patches. Earlier teams start with one patch, later teams start with another patch, and there's maybe at most a 2-patch gap. Because, whatever. And usually I'd be, okay, 1 patch difference, 2 patch differences, fine. But we're coming up to a point where there could be up to 3 or 4 patch differences for some regions or for some qualifications that make it not significantly harder to evaluate which teams are going to be better, but I think that some teams are going to have a leg up, having participated and played on stage a patch that is closer to the one at Worlds. Now, the Worlds patch usually has a larger difference. It's usually a whole competition of that sort, but more experience for patches that are closer to the one that is the Worlds patch still has an inherent advantage to the situation. You have a better and intimate knowledge of the differences between the two patches as opposed to the even significantly larger difference. The LPL is, I think, the LPL and the LJL are going to be worse off in terms of identifying the differences between the patch, like Worlds patch and their patch, than most of the other regions. And to me, that sounds, it's a little concerning, but I asked my friends about it, and to them, so long as there's not a huge difference in terms of the patches, and so far, there doesn't seem to be too much of a change for the moment. So long as there's not a big difference between the two, between the ranges of patches, then it does not matter as much. I have that inkling of concern inside of me, but it doesn't seem to be on the mind of Connor and Josh, who also casually take a look at these particular plays and having looked at it more on the angle of viewpoint of the support role. But I'd like to pass this question off to you. Do you think that the patch differences are going to make a large impact on the situation? Do you think it's not going to be as much of an impact, or the impact will be there, but it's not going to be so much of a difference between the different regions because World's patch is usually so different from everything else on previous years? I'd love to hear your thoughts about everything, patch notes to region formats and everything else that we've talked about with the different playoffs. Again, which ones have been your favorite so far? Which ones are you looking forward to? I'd love to hear all of that in the comments down below. Thank you again for everybody who watches. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you next week.